Hey, what's going on, guys? Nil Guides here. Welcome back to Nil Guides 2, or Nil Guides 4, you can say. Kind of unfiltered videos, no editing, so it doesn't take that much of a long time. It just needs a simple script and some preparation. I just wanted to talk about the top 5 formations, which I think are currently in FIFA right now, especially, from the pro tournaments. And what I've probably seen is probably the most common amongst players that I played, especially in the top tier players, especially in the high divisions. So I'm just going to go through the defensive, the middle tier, and attacking formations. I'm going to exclude certain formations. For example, like we do know certain formations, like the 5-3-2 that I devised. I'm just going to skip that formation for now because it's quite a niche formation. I mean, like, unless you watch the video, no one will really know about it. So you can say these are probably the most prominent or probably the most popular formations. What we're going to first start with is the 4-2-3-1. You can argue still probably the most meta formation from last year. In the beginning, in the first couple of weeks of FIFA, it wasn't the most meta formation. I did actually use the 4-4-2. The reason why the 4-4-2 was just a very good formation. As I said, I'll make a video on this on my main channel eventually. But it's probably the most balanced formation in the game. Naturally, it covers 60% of the pitch. You cover all areas of the pitch. Defensively, you're quite solid. But what the key was is if you play the 4-4-2, you could have one of your strikers on comeback on offense. So what this means is when you're defending, you're almost defending in like you can probably say like a 4-4-1-1. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore, or 4-3-1 wide. So that's why this formation is not really as good as it was. Just in case you don't know, basically after the patch, if you have, long story short, if you have four defenders in your back line, you can only at one time have 4 midfielders. That's it. So even if you put these both on comeback on offense, they still won't come back because you have 4 midfielders. It's the same with, for example, 3 defender formations or 5 defender formations. In 3 defender or 5 defender formations, you can only have at one time 3 midfielders. So, for example, in this situation, you can only have 3 midfielders back. If I was playing a 5 defender formation, you can only ever have only 3 midfielders in the middle. So that kind of changed the way the patch worked. That's why you can argue the 3-5-2 became my 3-5-2 became less effective. But as I said, the 3-5-2 it still works. I like it. I actually like it now post patch. Obviously pre patch. The 2 strikers they kind of used to kind of provide a support like over here and over here defensively. But I think it's a bit more attacking now. I actually like the formation. I think people who struggle defensively, I suppose they didn't like it so much. But I did. But anyway, going back to the video. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's why the 4-2-3-1 kind of rose to prominence again. It's simply because most of the meta formations are like the 4-4-2. They're not as effective, especially with the comeback on defense nerf. The reason why it doesn't work, the reason why the nerf doesn't work in this formation, because the way the formation is like laid out, because it's already got, you can argue, 5 players in midfield, the game doesn't push a player forward. So what the new patch is trying to say, if, let's say, for example, you're playing a 4-4-2, you have an extra strike over here, you can't bring this person back. But because the formation naturally has, you can argue, 5 midfielders, that's why you can still ask the cam to come back on offense, if that makes sense. They won't be kind of inside the box, but they'll still be in a more reserved position. But the 4-2-3-1, obviously, I still think it probably is, going back to probably the meta formation, I would say. It's a very good formation, probably the most stable formation, as I said, defensively and offensively. But I'm sure you see my video, so I'm just going to skip through that. But this is a formation I said you can use from when you're losing, I suppose you can say you're winning, losing. It's probably a good formation to use all around. The next one I wanted to go into is the 4-1-2-1-2. Now, you probably see my video on this channel. You probably saw my 4-1-2-1-2 guide. I'm very close to releasing the video. I'm just making some final changes with the formation. But again, I like this formation. It's a very aggressive formation, especially with long ball. It's a really good tactic with long ball because your players, in particular your left centre mid and right centre mid, don't forget they don't have getting behind for their instructions. So when you put long ball on them, they basically dart forward. So I think it's a really good formation. I really, really like this formation. Stay tuned for the video. The full video will come out soon. I know most of you guys love the tactics anyway of the 4-1-2-1-2 that I released. In case you're wondering, these tactics are just a bit different because I'm testing stuff out. I wouldn't recommend using the tactics you see on the screen now. I'm just kind of making some minor changes, just kind of adjusting, trying things out. But yeah, 4-1-2-1-2 second variation is still a very good formation. A very direct formation. I actually like it a lot. One thing I would say to you is if you are going to use this formation, just try, maybe I would say post-patch increase the width, the defensive width. The reason why is I think on the wing areas, I'm seeing a lot more prominence in formations, for example, like 4-4-2. I think because the 4-1-2-1-2 is quite a narrow formation, by default, it's a narrow formation, so you don't want to leave your width on 5. So I'll probably go with a width of 7. And don't forget as well, with instructions, always put cover wing for defensive position. It's only if you're going up against another 4-1-2-1-2, you can put cover center. But generally speaking, most people are going to change formations, use wide formations. So that's why I'll go with, cover wing. But again, a very good formation, very good attacking formation. I would say it kind of rose back to prominence when FIFA 20 came out. And I think it still is. It's more of a direct formation when you're losing. This wouldn't be a formation to kind of hold a victory in. If I was winning 1-0, I probably wouldn't use the 4-1-2-1-2 unless I wanted to keep applying pressure or keeping up the attack. The third formation we're going to move to is, like I said, the 4-4-2. I prefer the second variation. I know there's a lot of pro players and a lot of top players are using the 4-4-2, the middle variation. But I just think, these centre mids, you don't have, for example, the certain instructions like cut passing lanes. So that's why I personally prefer the 4-4-2 second variation, just because it gives you the instructions of, cut passing lanes. I think that's extremely vital. And that's why I prefer it. And they kind of still in roughly the same position anyway. But yeah, I prefer this formation. It's a really good formation, as I said. It's very good for formations like the 4-1-2-1-2, as I mentioned. It's very good for going down the wing. If you do like doing 1-2s between your left back and right back, like the 1-2s, where you do like a pass. So when you have the ball with your right back, and then you pass to your ram, then you pass it back to your right back, and then he makes a run, then you do a driven through ball down the line. If you like doing that, this is a very good formation to do that. It does provide a lot of support. It is very good, and kind of going on to like the fourth formation is kind of alongside that. There is the 4-4-2, the 4-2-2, so I think is rising back to its prominence now, because it's kind of the same as the 4-4-2, except for these cams are more centralized. What you can do is you can reduce the width. So if I was playing a 4-4-2, I'll probably do something like this, and then I'll have one width. So it's kind of like a 2-striker 4-1-2-1-2. That's the kind of the way I would play it. It's not obviously going to work out and transpire that way in game, but I just want my cams to be a bit more centralized. So if, for example, you want to play 4-4-2, and sometimes, say, for example, you don't want, for example, the left side of mid, the right side of mid to cut inside, because they only do that kind of in a final third area. Let's say they're not centralized enough. You can change to the 4-2-2. I actually think it's a very good formation. I really, really like it. To be honest, personally speaking, because I'm more of a player that likes to use all outlets, like wide areas and narrow areas, that's why I probably deviate more towards the 4-2-3-1, or for example, the 4-4-2, because you can have a best of all worlds. Problem is with the 4-1-2-1-2 second variation, and obviously the 4-2-2, is that it just kind of limits the way you can attack. You can mainly attack down the middle. One thing you can do though is you can actually, it's a new feature this year, you can actually have drift wide for your cams. So they kind of start off in a more reserved central position, but in a final third it ends up becoming like a 4-4-2. So this could be a good option. So let's say, for example, that maybe when you counter attack, you like to be a bit more centralized when you build up, but obviously when you're attacking, they kind of drift wide. So it's quite good. Obviously, I would suggest using fast players in this position, but that is obviously another option for you. The final formation I wanted to go into is a formation which I think it's the best of all worlds, and it's the 4-2-3-1, but it's the second variation. And I want to make a video on this soon. But because obviously you guys are sub to this channel, I just thought I'll let you guys know first. As usual, I kind of release everything here first before I release to my main channel. The reason why I like this formation is basically the 4-4-2. And if you think about it, you kind of have the wide players. You still have the wide players, of course. But what's a bit different and what's become ever more apparent is that post-patch, as I said, with the strikers come back on defense nerf, the formation acts a bit differently. So you can put this cam on come back on defense, and he will basically, so you kind of defend in a 4-2-3-1, but you can also attack in, in basically a 4-2-3-1 narrow formation. But it gives you the option of having these two wide players. Now, I would say if you're winning in a game, and let's say you're up against a 4-4-2, you can come back on defense and stay wide. Well, I prefer stay wide, because when you're attacking, I like these players to be wide as possible, kind of hugging us. I don't want to actually hug the sidelines deep at attack. I just want these guys to just be wide as possible, right? So let's say when you're wasting time, or you're time management, you can say you kind of have the wing areas to distribute the ball to. That's why I really like this formation. But against the 4-4-2, the reason why it's really important, if you think about how 4-4-2 is lined up, right? Let's just kind of do this. I know it doesn't really look the best, most aesthetically pleasing, but the 4-4-2, normally you get doubled up on the wing. So you have, your left back and your opponent's wingers. They normally kind of attack both your left mid and then your left back, I suppose you can say. So you need to be very wary of that. So that's why I think that when you have this formation, so when you have, for example, the right mid on comeback and defense, it helps defend against the 4-4-2. So if you are playing a 4-4-2 in game and you think, for example, like, okay, you want to waste time or you want to time manage a game, or you think your opponent's using the wings, I would suggest come back on defense with this formation. It's actually a really good formation. And as I said, when you're attacking, if you don't mind not having two strikers, I know people are now kind of preferring a cam now because a lot of people are parking the bus, and sometimes you don't want the two strikers to be kind of just where the bus is where your opponent's parking the bus. You kind of sometimes want your striker just kind of drop like as a false nine, dropping in midfield a bit. So I do think this will kind of rise more to prominence. People don't really use it that much, but it's a really good formation for closing the game out. I would say if you want to waste time, or let's say you're winning and you want to close the game out, I'll definitely use this formation. Just as a general rule of thumb, I will leave this unbalanced. Always leave this unbalanced. And another thing is going into tactics. Do not use possession. The reason why possession, when you're wasting time or time managing, you don't want your players to come short. Leave this unbalanced, and the key is you just want AI to make decisions for you. If, for example, you find a player and you want to push him forward, you can always push a player. Let's say, for example, your right mid. You can always push it forward using L1 on PS4 or LB on Xbox using a player trigger button. And that way you could push a guy forward. But you don't want to use possession. Unless you're a very skilled player, try to deviate away from using possession. But again, this is a very good formation. If I was going to close the game out, I'd probably stick with something like this. Depending on what player I'm if I'm playing like a 4-4-2, I might go balanced, reduce the depth a bit, and probably reduce the players in the box. And offensively, I'll probably have the width on 4, maybe even 3, just so the central players, I suppose you can say, are tight knitting together. But because the instructions for the left centre mid and right centre mid on stay wide, they're going to be, I suppose you can say, hugging the sidelines in some respect. So that's why I prefer it, so I can kind of do the 1-2s between, waste times in between the two CDMs, the cam and the striker, and then I have the wide players on the outside for distribute. Anyway, those are probably my top 5 formations. As I said, a lot of these are balanced. This is obviously a more of a defensive variation. The 4-2-2, the 4-1-2-1-2 second variation, probably the most attacking formations. This formation and maybe the 4-1-2-1-2, you can maybe argue are formations for either just defensive or offensively. So yeah, actually no, they're changing it. Yeah, so 4-2-2 and 4-1-2-1-2, I'll say more the attacking formations. The 4-2-3-1 wide and 4-1-2-1-2 narrow is kind of a best of both worlds. And then the 4-4-2, I would say, is attacking formation. But if, for example, you're a good player and you can defend, especially without two strikers, I'd recommend this formation. This is very good, especially if your opponent has the ball and you want to press. It's quite good for pressing. But anyway, those are kind of my top 5 formations. So you're probably going to see the top 5 formations on my main channel. Right now I'm working on a 4-1-2-1-2. I have to remake the 4-4-2. Even though I spent a month and a half making that video, obviously the patch has now killed it. So that one's going to be a bit delayed. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time I should get enough footage and enough, I suppose you can say, a more tested tactic and instructions. But for now, thank you very much for watching. If you do have any other questions, as usual, do let me know down below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.